For many, winning a golden demon is a childhood dream, and for some it became true for the first time this year. Others managed to grab a trophy after a decade of absence, proving to themselves that they still got it. All of these and other emotional stories happening at this event, and while once again an old master remains untouchable among them all. Covered in this traditional review format, let's talk about Golden Demon 2025 in Essen, Germany. Twice a year, thousands of painters from all over the world gather to celebrate Warhammer miniatures by entering pieces of miniature art they invested hundreds of hours into and presenting them to the world at the Golden Demons. Essen 2025 was no exception. The cabinets were packed tighter than a Space Marine drop pod, and the jury of Games Workshop judges decided over who would experience joy or disappointment, as each of the categories can only have 3 people walk away with trophies. Let's find out who these people were and what they cooked up to win these coveted prizes with. We're starting very strong with 40k single. The single mini categories are among the most prestigious to win and therefore are always the hardest fought for piece of real estate. But just to illustrate how tough this category was, I'd like to mention that there was 14 finalists, and that really shows how dense it was packed with entries that could all have walked away with a trophy. But such is the nature of Golden Demons that there can only be 3 that can win a demon, and one of them taking 3rd place was Andy Wardle's Fuegan. But before we talk about the minis, we have to talk about Games Workshop's pictures. It's worth mentioning that Games Workshop has improved the coverage of this event so much, and after we begged them for years to put results online, they finally started to do that about 5 to 6 years ago. And they even have the coverage online within a minute of the sword winner being announced. Picture quality always was up and down, but they seem to have dialed in a quality during the last few events that was quite good. And I think the pictures this year were really good, both when it comes to lighting and the chosen angle. And I really want to give Games Workshop props for that. But then someone cranked up the saturation and the post-processing, and now my eyes are bleeding. Let's take Andy's entry and compare it to what is up on his Instagram page, and you will understand what I mean. The base almost turns a little yellow, while it's a subtle green in Andy's photos. The highlights turn from a more desaturated beige to full-on chromatic yellow, and the exposure is also through the roof. While Andy's black highlights have a subtle purple quality, they become mostly white in the event coverage. It's just something that we have to keep in mind and that we have to correct for when looking at the individual entries. What I like about this is obviously the neat execution, crisp blends, and also the small additional freehand on the axe. It's tricky to figure out how to make large surfaces like the helmet look interesting, and I think this pattern is a great solution. He did get rid of the banner and a couple of details in front, probably because it would have been too cluttered, and that was probably a smart move. 2nd place goes to Johan Ledus, and I think what is interesting here is the difference in style between Fuegan and this Archon. Very texture focused, both highlights on the armor, the base, and also the line work on the cloak. Also, there's a lot of mood building going on with what looks like a universal highlight. If you look at the base and then also the hair, there's a lot of blue going into these parts. Obviously, we got to mention the conversion. He really pushed a very static sculpt into a very interesting stance. And gold in this category goes to Matthew City with his crude and a very elaborate base. I remember that he entered this last year with a simpler base that you can see here, and I think this is a great improvement. Maybe the base helped it to be more present in the cabinet. But of course it also helps that the base is very well executed. Something I always say when you are planning a competition entry, make sure anything you add, like a bigger base, you have to make sure it adds value. If your base is just big and not well executed, it's often better to go for a more minimal base. So I think this is a great example of a well executed addition. It gives an already exceptionally well painted piece more story, a bigger presence, and all of it is just executed precisely and meticulously. Look at all these small lines. And so the addition lifts this piece up on so many levels. Again, keep in mind that the saturation is off here, and this is probably more true to how the colors really look. Of course, this style is very reminiscent of the heavy metal style with a focus on edge highlights. And if we zoom in, you can see the thicker line that sets up the transition and the thinner lines and the occasional really bright dots to push the contrast. The skin is also very reminiscent of how Games Workshop does orc skin these days. Besides the crispness here, there's so much additional sharp detail going on, like the cracks in the belts and the handle of the pistol, and then of course look at all the base detail. It's just very cool. I like that this category shows that you can take out-of-the-box models and really focus on a great execution and win, but also that conversions and individuality is being rewarded when we look at Johann's piece. I also want to do a few honorable mentions for pieces I found that didn't receive any trophies, but really stood out to me. First of all, this Blood Angels Champion by Anthony Smith, and you guys know by now that I'm not a fan of these all non-metallic gold minis, but you got to give props where they are due. So I really like the smoothness and the placement of light, as well as the different warm hues in there. Before we look at the next category, let me tell you about something really cool I found recently. In terms of FOMO boxes, I'm trying to buy secondhand as much as possible when I hunt for parts I can use for Golden Demon entries. But also, if you're looking to fill out the roster of your army, mini swap is something you should consider looking into. Miniswap makes it easier than ever before to find listings of minis that fit your collection. Like you can even browse for particular colors used in the listing of painted armies, or to quickly sell minis of your own that you have no use for anymore. And today I'm proud that Miniswap gave me the opportunity to offer 2 awesome promotions to you guys. And the first is, if you create an account using the link in the description below, you will not be charged a dime to sell on Miniswap. And that's right, you can sell your pile of shame, and Miniswap is going to take 0% commission fees from you for the first 3 months as a seller on the platform. That way you will keep more of your earnings than if you sold on eBay. Second, if you have been overwhelmed by the temptation to buy another box, or want to take the responsible route by buying your next minis used, Miniswap is giving you a great reason to make your next purchase on their site. Whatever you choose to buy, they will ship it to you for free. Miniswap was created by a team of hobbyists who want to make it safer to exchange minis online without being charged exorbitant fees. So when you use Miniswap to fulfill your hobby needs, you are supporting an initiative driven by the ideal to make it easier and safer to buy and sell minis online. The page is getting better and better too, and more functional. It just received a new alert feature that notifies you when a listing is created that matches your search terms, like Logan, Grimnar and Painted, for example. Another cool thing they just implemented is the marketplace for painted minis. If you have a particular edition for your army in mind and picking it up painted will make sure you can use it in time for your next tournament, you'll probably enjoy this feature. Or if you're looking for an additional outlet as a commission painter, this is a great option too. And it doesn't stop there. I know that the creators are dedicated to make the platform even better. They're building some really cool features like an image-based mini identification tool and a used mini pricing tool to improve market transparency. So stay tuned for more. But for now, sign up using my link below, save some money and get swapping. Third place in 40k unit goes to Eric Swinson with this Deathwatch kill team. And my understanding is that he has been painting these to play with and to unwind. And in my opinion, that shows how understanding light and how it interacts with different surfaces goes a long way. I don't think that he spent hundreds of hours on these, and it doesn't look like every highlight is blended with layers on end, but these are just rendered so well that they don't need that perfection. A lot of the material is built with a couple of well-placed lines, like on the hammer here. And another stunning display of this is the plasma rifle glow reflecting in the armor and the face. And speaking about faces, this is probably the most incredible part about these miniatures. I have to go to Eric's Instagram because the official pictures are not quite doing it justice. These faces just look real, just so full of colors and character, as if they were portraits captured on canvas. And well, now Eric can play games of Kill Team with a squad that won a Golden Demon. Hendarian places second in this category, and this is a perfect example of when a painter takes a relatively minimalist Elder design and turns it into something visually explosive. Hendarian's swooping hawks are absolutely radiant. He's known for 2 things: a bit of a bias towards Elder and his smooth blends that he puts on everything, whether that's a Wraith Lord or an Elder Titan. And he says that blending on these hawks took him up to 600 hours as well. The white and that cool teal color against the fiery orange makes for a great color harmony. This must have really stood out in the cabinets. I think the consistent, clean and shiny feeling makes for an almost ethereal and alien feel of an Eldari craft world, and it contrasts nicely with the more earthen tones of the base. A gold in this category goes to Martin Pettersson, also known as Drink to Paint on Instagram. His page reads, former and occasional heavy metal painter, and this clearly shows in his entry with the typical edge highlights and the brownish shading in the armor panels. The gold is painted in a very heavy metal style rendition too, and that face could be straight from a box art. It's interesting to compare this to what Eric Swinson did on his Death Watch faces, and to see the different approaches that can both perform very well in Golden Demons. And this style, of course, just lends itself so well to competition painting, as you can create crisp models that look clean and well executed. After all, it has been engineered to present miniatures in the best way. And we have definitely seen a bit of a resurgence of the style doing extremely well in this competition already with the 40k single winner, and we will encounter it again in future categories. Warhammer 40k Large War Monster sees this Fulgrim by Theo Lamoury in third place, and what pops out is the freehand definition of the snake body, the high contrast line work on the wings, and the shiny pink armor. On closer inspection, we can see all the subtle color shifts in the hair, the gold armor, and particularly the sword. They have some awesome gradients from a salmon color to the subtle turquoise glow of the power weapon and the bluish steel at the front. A very intriguing rendition. This mini shines a lot more on darker backgrounds, as you can see, and I also dig the base. It's very simple, but it's an effective approach. It looks like cracked stone over lava, only with a more magenta glow that fits the overall color scheme. Adam Hallon returns to Golden Demon after an absence of over 10 years with this Dreadnought, and the defining feature of this entry clearly is the freehands. Definitely a throwback to earlier Golden Demon times when the ever-evolving arms race to impress judges led to more and more freehands being implemented. Painters trying to show off their painting skills beyond smooth blends. This approach did fade out again over time, but it's a cool thing to see a similar piece being able to place again. I'm a fan of the additional texture, especially in the non-metallic metal of the weapon, but also the blue armor panels, and I also dig the heavier battle damage. The large contrast range really gives these scars some depth and the armor plates some weight. The winning entry of this category has been created by yet another person returning to the Golden Demon after years of absence, Jaroslav Drabek, also known as Camelson, and he also gave this Deathkiller Wartrike a very contrast-rich rendition. From the panels, also adorned with freehand cracks and crisp gradients, and edge highlights, to the driver being defined through this purple and green contrast. Personally, I like the tires a lot. Both the color and the definition really stands out to me. It really makes it look like they're made of rubber. Next we have the Age of Sigmar single miniature category, and Richard Gray placing in third place made me really happy personally, because he has had a bit of a difficult time with Golden Demons in the past few years, and now it seems like the spell is broken again. And definitely deserved too. I really liked what he did with the new Deathbringer, not to be confused with the Death Dealer. And what I like about this one is the rendition of light and material, but we already know that Richard is a master of this. Now, placement of light, like the reflections on the axe and the shoulders, or just look at the hip guard. All of this makes this look like it's real. And then all the intricate details like rust and verdigris just sprinkled in on the different materials is such a minute but yet important detail. I also really like the base. I'm always fascinated by these sculpted sand dunes and how they look like the real thing. And then details like the carved stone just round everything out. Silver in this category goes to Erka Marthio, and he's coming in with this awesome steelwork conversion. He did post a turntable of the customization result, and you can see that the base is a clever blend of natural pieces with potty and plastic parts. And there's a lot of playing around with the framing of the miniature, guiding the eye of the viewer and other clever compositional tricks. And that's definitely one of the strengths of this entry, on top of already being really well painted. I also like the mood he generates with the colors and the water effect. It's important to mention that this category also had 14 finalists, so these winners went against incredibly strong competition, and you really can see the effort and skill that went into them. But just like always, there's someone that seems untouchable, and that's Albert Moreto Font, coming in first place yet again with his Imperial Sorcerer. What makes Albert almost unbeatable is the dedication he puts in. Starting with the research and the planning, there's no less than 17 kids that contributed parts to the scene, and that's quite insane. You know, ages ago there was this running joke that you can only win the Slayer Sword if you used the most kids for your entry in the competition, so Games Workshop can profit off of it. Obviously, this is the definitive proof of that. I'm just kidding. Obviously, it's impossible to tell exactly, but Albert told me that he estimates about 600 hours over 7 months invested into this piece, and it truly shows. I like the modulation of the background colors, so the mini can stand out with a more saturated finish, the attention to detail, and especially the way he is able to define spheres and three-dimensional objects in a way they still look good from any given viewing angle. And one thing that I find a bit tricky, and that's just my personal opinion, as it is just part of the framework of the Golden Demon competition these days, and I'd probably do the same thing if I ever entered again. But a lot of single mini entries do feel like mini dioramas. Albert's piece, for example, also Erkas. Most of the squads these days are on massive show bases too, and again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just an interesting observation of a development and something that changes the way you have to plan your entries. Like, if everyone is doing these fantastic bases around the minis they are painting, you have to at least consider doing the same thing. One honorable mention in my book was Anthony Smith with this very smooth red entry. I love the high contrast reds, the subtle black and gold tones, and the definition of the complex shapes of the sword, for example. Another entry that I believe got nothing, or maybe only notable, so the lowest level of recognition, or no recognition, was Arno Lazaro's Nurglings, and I would really like to know why that wasn't a commended or finalist, but of course we don't have the luxury to see it up close like the judges did. Maybe it could have been a bit rushed. In any case though, I really like the colors here and the base details, including the glowing mushrooms. Age of Sigmar unit, Warcry, or Underworld's Warband, what a mouthful. So basically any group of fantasy miniatures is the next category. And third place goes to Jonathan de Vos with this Goblin Wolf Cavalry. In recent years, these bases that make it look like the minis are charging through the woods have become a staple in this competition. Always a good setting for these more feral and wild miniature types. It's a bit hard to talk about other aspects of the piece as the size of the base forces a wide picture frame, but one thing I know is that making fur look good is always tricky. Definitely not a recommended thing for aspiring Golden Demon competitors, in my opinion. A second place, and this is a re-entry from a past competition, goes to Simon Sikora, also known as Sumikito. Very bold choice of a really smooth paint job for the Chosen of Nurgle, but his meticulous blending style earned him the silver reward in this category in this competition. Axel Olsson took home the gold-coated resin for this category with his merry bunch of Flesh Eater Court. A pretty standard show base, working well with the pillar the big guy comes with, and it's interesting to start with this mini. The skin that has this line pattern that is clearly intended to show some extra painting skill beyond just defining the shapes that are already there. Reminds me a lot of the piece Johan Ledus won the Ever Chosen with in 2019. Style-wise, it also reminds me a lot of Angelo Di Kello's work with a lot of color tones spliced into the main colors. Like, we can see that purple here and there in the shadows, and the clearly defined shapes, like all the muscles that all receive a bit of an edge highlight for that extra definition. It's again a winner that has this more distinct style that relies on extra lines for more contrast and definition. That's making a bit of a comeback. I really think the judges had a bit of criteria when it comes to that, and that was something that they were looking for. I also like the metallics, very subtle, and also the gore that's telling a story but is not too overdone. Age of Sigmar Large Mini or War Machine has been dominated by monsters this year, and it has told another comeback story. It also told the story of a first-time winner we all know, and that's Lucas from Squidmar Miniatures coming in third place with this Chaos Demon. It's no secret that while his work on Squidmar's channel always has to adhere to a tight release schedule, he strives for higher accolades with his personal painting. And I'm happy for him that the dedication he put into this piece paid off. This was another really tough category, as you can probably tell from the names in the finalist slide, but I really like the kit bash here, going off of a Wilder Fiend body and using the vulture wings along with the Demon Prince head. And the paint job makes this thing look alive, going from more fleshy and pink tones on the limbs to a more muted body and then a really saturated face and glowing eyes and mouth, and that really draws the attention, especially with some of the light reflecting off of the dark horns. He also put a lot of effort into texturing the wings and meticulously paint every single one of these 6,549 lines on the feathers. You really got to give him props for not cheaping out here. Thibault has established himself on this stage as someone you always have to consider when it comes to the top 3. He used to lean more into scratch build 3D sculpts, and the base is built from scratch again, but of course since Games Workshop has clarified in the rules that you have to use an actual Warhammer mini, at least as a base for your entry, he changed his approach. Of course, it's still heavily customized, as you can see in these posts. And as far as the painting goes, we see a very muted scheme, even with the overkill saturation of the official pictures. And I think this suits the model extremely well. It makes the skin look rotten and sick, especially with the greens and the purple shades that are put in. This is one of my favorites, but I'm a little biased because I've always wanted to put the Harbinger of Nurgle Rider on the larger beast, and I think this is a really awesome version of that. The head in particular got a cool little twist with this agonized deformed mouth. Angelo Di Chiello is known as the person that won the most Golden Demon trophies ever. You have to admire his dedication to revisit the contest for more than 20 decades, where others got bored of the format or the framework. He persevered and graced us with a huge catalog of awesome pieces in the Warhammer universe. Now I know he has been through a few hardships and doubting his work and whether he still got it over the past couple of years, but I'm sure this success rekindled his passion, and he's gonna be a bit of a menace in any future Golden Demon iterations too. He's probably the godfather of the heavy metal plus style, and he again shows that he perfected this style on his Keeper of Secrets. The contrast is always maximized, pushing the edges and everything he wants to define to the max, so the miniatures become clearly readable, and all of that is supported by a smooth definition of shapes. The upper body really illustrates what I mean here. His colors are always so well balanced, often drawn together by using a more pastel and desaturated palette, and almost all surfaces have a more or less subtle color shift. An extreme example of that obviously being the stockings that reflect all kinds of ambient and adjacent colors. Everything is just executed very smoothly and rounded out by some well-placed freehand patterns. While everything looks exciting, nothing really is overdone. Some people told me they really would have liked to see Borgia's Ionos Cryptborn plays, but I think this is just a perfect example for one of the trends I already mentioned in this issue of Golden Demon. It wasn't just enough to present something artistically interesting. Like, this piece is clearly fantastic when it comes to the interpretation. Just look at the light reflecting on the gold in these incredible patterns, or the saturated reds on the wings and how they fade into darker purple black. But you also had to display a more technically perfect execution, and while the artistic approach and compositional skill carried his Iridan to the Slayer Sword at Adepticon, here it probably wasn't enough. And that just shows that from one Golden Demon to the next, preferences can shift dramatically. A bit of a contrast was Sumikita's work on the Snake Lady here. Obviously, everything is meticulously blended, every transition is smooth and well executed, but there's not that much life in these blends. They almost become a bit sterile. So I think you need an amalgam of both to place in this super tough category. The last honorable mention goes to Mark Maskelans and his Slan Starmaster. It's an explosion of colors, but in such a subtle way. All color choices work together to make this a coherent piece, and maybe it's the slight pastel quality to most of the colors that draws it together so expertly. He just has that feeling for colors that you just cannot imitate. And of course, that's a really great base that took a lot of thought and knowledge to compose. I really feel this should have placed, but of course that's easy to say without holding it in hand. The Horus Heresy is a category that potentially pits tanks against Primarchs, Saturnine suits, or just regular infantry. The winners turn out to almost exclusively be infantry models though. Third place goes to Bastian Salvador with a Space Wolf on a snowy base, and I like the small interaction between the Marine and the wolf's fur being painted very nicely. I like the subtle strains showing a slight blue tint and the brighter hairs peeking out from the lower areas. It almost steals the show from the main mini. I particularly like the face with the clearly defined zones, and the armor also has a great balance between texture and light definition. Really cool little scene. Second place went to Anthony Smith with this neatly defined Death God Marine. Very particular and clean way to paint the highlights, and the back view with the cloak is also really stunning. I also like the minimalistic base that still has a bit of storytelling. So well. First place goes to Duan Henlong, and this was a bit of a slow burner for me. The more you look at it, the more you realize the genius of this model. Like, everything is very meticulously highlighted and technically well executed with the stipple blending texture style. For example, the loincloth just looks really well defined. The folds build that really sharp pattern of light and shadow, and the highlights on the volumes are very subtle, but defines everything so well. The spherical shapes all have very cool bounce lights with the cooler light from above and some warmer tones from below. But the real kicker is the gold trim on the shoulders. On first sight, I would have believed that this is true metallics reflecting the light of the surroundings. But this is actually non-metallic metal that perfectly mimics this behavior. And very often non-metallic metal will be very intense and demanding a lot of attention. This year, while also going from very dark to very bright, so having an awesome range of contrast, supports the general muted light situation, and it's borderline genius. The backdrop kind of puts us right into the middle of Istvan 4 and the Dropside Massacre. I also like how happy he looked on stage. Really makes me wish I could feel these human emotions. Third place in the old work category goes to Niels Andersen and his High Elf, and I'm happy to see this one take a trophy because I was a little bit involved with some early coaching about the composition of the base and the general scene. The finished piece is an explosion of color, but kind of drawn together by what looks like a universal slightly yellowish highlight color. At least we get that idea from the chainmail, base, and also the top of the tree and the stairs. Really cool little scene. And then we have Erka coming in with this weird boy orc, doing exactly the opposite with a very muted and subtle base, and doing just as much world building with a few details like the toad and some reed and generally muted colors, indicating that this is some remote swamp. First place goes to Angelo Di Cello, using the great Miao Ying storm dragon sculpt in human form. I like that he added these lightning bolts that hold up elements of the base, like the skull and the helmet that adds to the illusion of her just starting to lift off of the ground and floating, and stones and other objects being lifted up alongside her. The color composition is just breathtaking. Everything is in that range of dark blue to bright turquoise with a hint of purple and green in some details, and of course the subtle gold. Again, we see Angelo do a tasteful addition of freehands that support the idea more than competing for attention. The cloak in particular has this really cool lightning pattern. All of that really makes this one of my favorite minis in the competition. This Golden Demon was almost drama-free. One thing that happened though was Jose Carlos Reverte's Green Knight getting nothing. Not even a notable. And while of course you could debate about which of the entries was better painted, this should have at least been in the running for placing in my opinion. So my guess is it got disqualified or shadow banned, and the reason is probably really close to what happened to Niels Andersen with his Lord of the Rings Gollum piece the last year that included a 3D scanned and repost model of Gollum. This Green Knight included a recast of the Lady of the Lake in clear resin, and while it looks absolutely stunning, like just look at the water vortex around it and how it seamlessly integrates, Games Workshop just doesn't like that. Which is fair, as of course this is their event and they make the rules, but I think we really need to mention this as an outstanding part of this competition regardless. I also found the Stroll Hack by Lucas Pina of Spira Mirabilis fame. That's just the most amazing conversion. The owl made from a goblin face just cracks me up every time. And here you can also see the painted version, a really creative project and such a characterful piece. The Lord of the Rings category saw Carlos Garcia Juan place third with this War of the Rohirrim Snow Troll, using a really cool blue from below effect, and since he's standing on a snow and ice base, I assume. And second place going to Joshua Gatti with one of my favorite minis of this category, zooming in on the face, it just looks almost real, or like a realistic portrait painting. The eyes almost look alive and the skin color is just amazing. I like the definition of the axe and also the muted gold in particular. First place went to Kamil Kosira with his bulk, Spawn of Azog. There's a lot of lovely color shifts in the skin, especially around the parts stuck in his chest, and I like the rendition of the metal. Also comes with a ravine covered in snow for some world building. Blood Bowl always is a fun category where you never quite know what to expect. Bronze going to Lukas Borowick and his Chaos Dwarf. Standing out the most is probably the texture he chose to work with. Like all these little scratches make these small surfaces super interesting. And I also like the range of contrast on the piece, especially visible in the gold trim of the rifle. And I also dig the attempt at some crimped up leather in the gloves. A second place went to Pablo Garcia Salinas. I've always loved these elf sculpts. The anatomy and the dynamic poses are really lovely. And Pablo went with a very similar pattern to the official paint jobs, but this piece really shines when it comes to the composition. I like how it's basically held up by these undead arms he's trying to escape from, and it looks like they reach up from the void that is the black base, his finger barely touching the ball. Also, the tilted angle and the figure being almost horizontal adds so much movement and drama. This is a really smart entry and probably really stood out from a lot of the minis on grass bases. First place goes to Jordan Toner. The thing that stands out immediately is the pale orc face against the dark armor, and the orange eye popping out from the bright face adds another level of intrigue. And I really like how the face is defined with this bold line work. And technically this is a really well done mini. It aligns a lot with the general theme of this year's winners, generally being more technically well executed. The freehands have very straight lines, sharp edges, and the texture on the black just steals the cake. Necromunda, again a category where a wide range of minis could go. It could include ambots and tyranids, squads and vehicles or monsters, but the winners again are single minis, so let's dive in. Third place goes to NRM, who usually has unlocked the secret to what judges are looking for in a gold winning piece, as we're going to see later. It's a very cool take on the box art, and I especially like the critter he's holding up and the extra texture he added, as well as the green in the recesses. Baptiste Richebe presenting this clean Vandoth the Fallen on an elevated base for second place. And Florian Wienand taking gold with his version of House Thai Omiodo Coven, really standing out through all of these intricate freehand patterns. Just remember how tiny Necromunda minis are. The tree in the back triggers me though. I'm not a fan of using too much natural basing material. It always kind of takes me out of the immersion. Epic scale third place goes to Duan Henlong with this War Master Heavy Battle Titan in what looks like Legio Metallica pattern, with a panel of three-handed skulls. Really nice touch. It's always fun to see these Titan dioramas with small space marines and dreadnoughts on the battlefield, as something you couldn't quite do as easily with their big brothers, at least not in this price range. This category also has a tradition of flying units pictured in the air or in space, or what looks like just beyond the stratosphere in this case. Hindarian takes second place with this minimalistic background, creating an awesome mood contrasting against the intense colors of these Elder Nightwing Interceptors, just like his swooping hawks before. And gold goes to yet another Legio Metallica unit, once again by James Taro, who made himself a home in this category over the last few years, with this warband hunting pack strolling through a battlefield, stomping on some blown up tank debris and containers. Diorama, the category where storytelling is rewarded just as much as technical prowess, sees LKA taking bronze with his Forge World Sanguinius in full non-metallic metal gold armor, fighting against a bunch of bloodletters. I don't quite know why this would go into diorama, but it looks like the painting blew away any doubts and earned him a demon trophy that he worked hard for, judging from the definition in the gold. In second place, Ito Takamo shows us an emotional piece, Greek soldiers stopping in the midst of battle to bless a dying sister of battle. I like how the scene is lighter in the middle where the focus should be, creating this intimate, tragic moment with the battle still raging outside, represented by the other two Kriegers in the back, just outside the windows. First place goes to Annie Wardle, who is on his mini diorama arc, presenting us with a scene centered around this dying female miniature and what looks like a Light of Eltharion mini with the head swap holding her. A great addition to detail. I especially like the transparent fabric over her face and the pink reflecting in the white armor. One honorable mention I'd like to give in this category is Arturo's Hourglass diorama. That's just such a cool idea. You can literally flip it on its head and see the other side. And while it might not have been on par with the winners technique-wise, you got to love the creativity. So Duel is a category where interaction between two models is front and center. The more these figures interact, the better. And I think This year's winners show us a kind of progression. What do I mean with that? Well, let's look at Sebastian Schubert's entry. He built a whole scene around his protagonists, and for that category, it's almost a bit overkill. When you build a lot of scenery for a duel, I feel like you should make the scene part of the story or the interaction, and make it clear on first sight that the scene is part of it. Like this here could be a significant battle or event from the lore that I'm missing. But what I'm trying to say is make it so that everyone understands what's going on, even if they are not lore gurus. Like an assassin jumping from a tower or a hunter stepping out of the shadows. In any case, as neat as this scene looks, I just don't understand the significance, and I thought it might be good to talk about that. On the other hand, we have two models jumping at each other. I'm assuming there's a lot of conversion going on, but just like two models standing there, pointing at each other, which was the classic duel entry for a while, there's little other interaction. If you move on to second place in the category, we see two out-of-the-box models cleverly pieced together by Jonathan de Vos. So this is a strategy you can follow if you want to avoid having to do a lot of conversions. Find 2 minutes that result in a dynamic interaction when pieced together properly. In this case, I like the use of these tiny beads drenched in transparent paint. It's been done with Nurgle since a few decades, but still makes for an awesome effect. And then with Yisong Liu's gold winning entry, we see that interaction. The Nurgle Marine literally crumbling under the weight of the bike landing on him. The relatively simple base supporting that idea, because it also looks like it cracked under the weight of both protagonists. And that idea is literally conveyed by just two simple concrete plates. Here you can see all of the repositioning, kit bashing and resculpting that went into the entry. I really like the painting. Everything is so well rendered. Lights and shadows placed very credibly and executed really well. I especially like the subtle blue backlight effect that really frames the scene and creates an extra layer of drama. The Youngbloods categories have been getting better and better in the last few years. But if the question, did your parents help you with your homework, ever was warranted to ask, then I think it's this time. Remember, this is a category you can enter if you are from 12 to 15 years old. Stan gives us this little scene including a nice base, the rocks being really well sculpted, and I think this is a conversion. At least the body looks like it's from a goblin from the Gobblepalooza with a head and staff swap. And of course the colors work together really well. All of the blending is really good, and so is the rendering of all the different textures. Just look at the non-metallic metal of the cauldron. I like the multi-layered base Henry used to present this entry. The little Nurgling gets his own stage, so to speak. The reds of the base contrast nicely against the green armor, and then what looks like a lot of red bounce lights. Again, we see non-metallics to a really high standard, lots of texture and other layers of detail in the execution. So much better than we would expect from Youngbloods. And then Maximilian goes and tops all of this. Like, just look at the fur texture. That's better than 95% of the grown-up population could do it. The highlights in the armor are so well placed. They have additional color transitions. Like, they don't just go from dark gray to white. They have browns in them, blues, yellows. It's just unbelievably well rendered. And the fur framing the helmet nicely by having the brighter areas around it. So like a really awesome volumetric highlight that then fades into darker colors near the edges. There's just so many concepts in this you wouldn't expect from Youngbloods. The gold non-metallic metal has amazing blends, and the light placement is so realistic. It's a little insane. The open competition, or as I call it, I have an extra single mini to enter. No idea why Stan Froden ended up in this category with his rider, especially since the base doesn't look a lot bigger than others we saw. Well, here we are. Maybe it was his choice. We already saw this piece in an earlier Golden Demon, and it's cool to see it placed this time. Grid conversion, and especially the base with all that lichen texture, is still impressive. The second place goes to Liam Hopkins with this cool flying fish that looks like the front was scratch built, and an epic water base. NRM did grab a second trophy in the open with his Nurgle Ogre conversion. Obviously we get to enjoy his trademark micro-texturing dialed up a notch with the armor texturing. I like all the additional horns and the way he used the fly swarms from that Nurgle mini. I don't remember right now. And that dropping jaw just looks awesome. The muted gold fits the Nurgle theme really well, and I also like the light effect on the edge of the blade. Bleeding into the surfaces. With the open competition, very often I'm a little disappointed that we don't see these crazy over-the-top entries anymore. Like in the past, people entered scratch-built props and busts, and we kind of don't get that anymore. So before we talk about the Slayer Sword winner, let's touch on a few trends that we saw in this iteration of the competition. There were a lot more winners, and especially gold trophies were going to entries using true metallics. There were 7 gold winners that used metallics. Versus 2 compared to Adepticon this year. We saw a little less of the artistic and free paint jobs, and there was more of a focus on technical paint jobs. There were also not that many winners with multiple wins. I think it was 5 or 6 that won 2, but no one won 3 or 4. And in my opinion, that's an indicator that this was a competition with a denser field of great minis. From what I heard, the organization this year was great, apart from the cabinet still being abysmally lit, but I think that's never going to change for logistical reasons. Everything seemed to have gone very smoothly, especially the winner's ceremony. Also, I'd like to mention that they did the plaques for the demons on site, so everyone that got a trophy took it home personalized, which is pretty cool, and they also received one of these cool cases for the statues. Props to Games Workshop for that. Really awesome. So Albert's Slayer Sword winning piece, in my opinion, truly stands out among most of the winning pieces. And while it is undoubtedly due to a lot of talent and practice over decades of painting, I also think it is undeniable that focusing on a single entry for hundreds of hours, spread over months of work, executing all stages from the planning to the conversion, and of course the painting to perfection, will always pay off in a contest like Golden Demon. I think out of the other gold winners, maybe Matthew Sidis' piece was in the run when it comes to technical execution, but Albert just beats it in scope and world building. But he would have beat almost anyone in that regard with this entry, so that's nothing to be ashamed about. And Angela's Keeper of Secrets could have been close too, but again, Albert's piece just has that edge when it comes to all 3 aspects: execution, customization, and storytelling within the Warhammer world. If I had to pick a favorite, I'd say it was the Kroot, just because it's such a strong entry relying purely on painting skills, and the result is just so well-rounded, crisp but yet lively. I also really like Erka's piece, just because it was so strong in many aspects: conversion, planning, and also the painting. I like Richard's piece too, showing that you can win with an out-of-the-box mini again. Basically, that whole category was nuts. Duan's Saturnine Praetor was amazing in its genius, and I like what Angelo did with his Old World mini. Okay, that's all I have. I hope you enjoyed this review, and see you next time.